Welcome to Threads of Enlightenment, a podcast devoted to helping you overcome challenges in your life that prevent you from becoming the best version of yourself. Each episode features interviews with people from all walks of life about their journey of self-development and the principles they utilize to overcome their fears to achieve their desired outcome. Ready to be enlightened? Here's your host, Ken Primus.
Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, guys, this is one of my favorite places right here because I get an opportunity to welcome our guests because I know they're coming with a couple of things I deem very expensive, their time. What a precious commodity, 24 hours given to all of us. Now, what you do with that 24 hours, man, is going to tell us a lot about you. And I've always tried to educate folks to remember to respect time, honor time. If you do that, you will approach your relationships, your conversations, your life differently. The other is the journey. The journey is a powerful creator, and it has created the individual before us, and that is Eric. And so we want to thank him for coming and spending both of these precious commodity here with us at Threads of Enlightenment. Eric, thank you so much for coming, man.
Thank you so much for having me, Ken.
It's an honor, man. And one of the questions I always ask my guests is, how do you serve mankind? And I ask them that, Eric, for a couple of reasons, to help them to crystallize basically what their life mission is, their current assignment that they have. And the other is to alert the listener that this journey is just a little more than just about yourself. It's about all of us together. And so my question is, how do you serve mankind?
Well, I'm a life coach and a writing coach, and I say those two things together, even though I know a lot of people might not associate them together, because I started as a writing coach. My background is in screenwriting, and I found out that when you're teaching people how to write, especially I work with younger students, you're trying to teach them really how to find their voice, right? Because writing isn't really about grammar. It's not about making sure you have a thesis statement. It's more about who are you? How do you express your voice? How are you going to express your voice in life? And then, putting that on the page. And so that's where the life coaching came in. And I'm also kind of a personality typing expert. I've been studying that for a very long time. And so I guess I would say how I contribute to the world would be, it's kind of like the Matrix. I feel like we are all kind of living in the Matrix when we're younger, in that we have these ideas of what we're supposed to be based on some of the more plentiful personality types. And I found my personality was a different one, and it felt really weird growing up. So now that I feel like I've taken the pill to get out of the Matrix, now how I contribute is empowering kids by giving them that pill to also get out of the Matrix and realize that they don't have to be what other people tell them they should be. They can kind of be the best version of themselves. So that is what I do, or at least I try to do every day.
That is incredible, man. I love it. One of the things that I think the sins of society, Eric, is that we are always trying to put individuals in this one mold, all the personalities in this thing, not educating or making everyone aware that that's not the case. There is this thing called individuality. And they have industries, big giant industries built on that: retina, voice recognition, fingerprinting, all of these different ways by which people harness the power of our individualism to make tons of money. One of our customs that we do here, we like to jump in this time machine that I call the memory. And we revisit a couple of spaces that we visit for short periods of time, if you will, until we begin to move forward into our life to become, quote unquote, an adult. And so, but one of the very first space that we start is our family. We have mom and dad that are there, and they are going to deposit some information, some data into you and I based on history from family, all the different things that they have learned from these two different families, and they're now going to begin to deposit into you. What was your family unit like?
You know, I remember growing up thinking relationships were about having one person constantly joke and provoke and trigger the other person, because that's how, in a fun way. So I grew up with a dad who was a bit of a prankster, and he loved to just get a rise out of my mom no matter what. And it was much more satisfying for him to get a rise out of her when we were there, because then, of course, she got even angrier. My mother was a school principal, and my father was he was a systems analyst, and I don't even know what that really means. But he didn't totally enjoy his job. He really enjoyed playing with us and playing around with life. And so what I realized early on was like, oh, we can have really different personalities. We don't have to like fit this mold. And I think I was lucky to have that, because I think my dad was also a personality type that was different and not that common. Whereas my mom was one of the more, I want to say common is not the right word, plentiful would probably be the better word for it. Obviously she's a school principal, so her job is to like instill, this is kids, this is what you should do, and this is what you should, this is your duty. Right. So it's good to have that balance, because I think if I had both parents like that with my own personality type, it would have been a bit overwhelming and maybe a little bit claustrophobic. So that's how I just grew up with that, knowing that, oh, okay, you can be very different and conflict in a lot of ways, and yet we can still get along. My parents always loved each other. It wasn't ever like, no, I hate you. But they realized at a very early age, I think, that they had different values. And I think they just grew to be okay with that.
That is a good, wonderful explanation of how it should be, man. As far as everyone have their differences, but yet you're able to manage that. So here is Eric in the midst of this interesting dichotomy, if you will. And you got a chance to see Dad in his glory and Mom responding to all of that. How did that interaction with Mom and Dad, how did that begin to affect you, and what imprint did it leave in you as an individual?
It's multi-pronged, right? Because having a principal for a mom, or a mom as a principal, is supposed to instill in you a bit of discipline and like listening to the rules. But then when you have a dad doing that, it just kind of imprinted that, oh, you know what? I don't necessarily have to follow the rules all the time, And in the words of my dad's like, at the end of the day, no one cares anyway. So you guys have to do what you want to do. And that was his thing. Is like, just try to be yourself, do what you want to do, because you're the only one that's really going to care at the end of the day. And I think that was very helpful, because I think and I know this is the next part, we go to school, it can be very overwhelming as well. Like if our parents are overwhelming, then school really is too, because we're told we have to do these things, and just looking at our peers, we have to be like them, or we should be like them. And so I always kept that in mind. And that was very helpful. Just be yourself if you can.
That's a beautiful gift that your dad offered you at such a young age. And you got a chance to literally witness that embodied in him as he's there in the house, getting on your mom's nerve, if you will, and being himself and doing his thing and being free. And you got an opportunity to actually witness what that looks like. Okay. So here you are, you're heading into school, as you mentioned, because, you got to relate to others. What was your relationship with others outside of your family, having seen your dad and your mom, how they interact, and the fact that Dad said, just be yourself? How did you react to others as being yourself?
It's hard to pull myself out, since I was so young. Obviously, we start school at 5 or 6, but I do remember that all of my teachers would always ask my parents during the parent-teacher conferences, they would always ask, is Eric an only child? And I think my parents were like, no, he has an older sister and a younger brother. I was a middle child, but they'd always ask if I was an only child. So I think that is probably pretty indicative of me kind of just being myself. And I think I didn't act like as if the world revolved around me, but I definitely just did what I wanted to do. And whether that got me in trouble or not, sometimes it did. I was very vocal in class. I was the class clown. And I know a lot of people say, oh, you're acting like your dad. And I don't think that's the case. And I think that's very true with personalities. I don't think we necessarily act like our parents all the time. If our personality types are the same, then we do. But mine was slightly different. I think having a dad like that had a similar personality type kind of brought the best out of my type and saying, oh, okay, I can do this too. This is what I like to do. I like to joke around. I like to talk maybe when I shouldn't and say things. And so basically the equivalent of my mom was the teacher. And so I was like, oh, if I could get a rise of the teacher and get a laugh out of the class. And that was like the best part for me. So school in a weird way was enjoyable for me, but it might not necessarily have been enjoyable for all my teachers. And yeah, so I navigated it that way. And I think in general, my classmates thought of me as like funny. And I read at an early age. So I think that sometimes helps people think that you're smart. I was not a great student, so my grades weren't always the best. I was kind of lazy and I didn't always focus, and I wouldn't say daydreamed. I just kind of spent most of my time trying to get people to laugh, and that's not necessarily good for your grades. So there was that conflict, right? I saw that conflict of grades versus, doing what you want to do.
And so you're moving in and you're heading towards, again, you're growing up and you're dealing with folks and you realize that they consider you the funny guy, and the teachers are perplexed with how you're moving through and is that the only child and stuff like that, because you're just being you. As you're heading towards college, Eric, because we know that's where everybody has to head out to when we're going to our beginnings of our beginning, if you will. And you're heading into college, you're coming out from under mom and dad per se. What was the conversation with you about the direction as to where you wanted to go in life? And why did you pick that direction?
It's interesting because I think as we get towards adolescence, in a weird way, I became, I guess it's not weird. I was a lot less confident than I was probably when I was in first grade or second grade, right? Adolescence will do that to you. Maybe it's the hormones. That's probably why I work with a lot of students most of my students are like sixth grade, and then to as long as they want me to coach them, because at that point, I think we're all getting a little insecure and we're not feeling great about ourselves. And for me, I always said I wanted to be a doctor, and I think it's because I wanted to help people. So my journey was my high school specialized in medicine. It was a medical magnet, I guess, here in LA. We were actually partnered with the USC. And, I think it was through high school learning that, no, I don't really like I don't like chemistry. I don't want to sit in class and do these kinds of things and balance equations. So it was that's when I really learned, I just want to help people. That's probably what I do. I want to interact with people and help them. And I think that also showed me that, it's not what you do, it's why you do it. So it's more about the reason. And so the reason was helping people. And I was like, how can I do that? I also liked watching movies. And so that's, of course, where the creative side came in. And of course, I wrote a book on personality types and where I blend the two together, right? I'm making a lot of jokes and making a lot of references to pop culture and trying to make it as easily accessible as possible using that creative background. But the intent is to help people find themselves, which I think was my goal in life. If I could do that, if I could just help people find themselves, I would be super happy.
Yeah, that's a noble cause, because I think that's the purpose of our assignment. I call it the assignment, Eric. I believe that no one came to this planet to have a job per se, that the job is they live and then die with jobs. I think each one of us came here with an assignment that is that's inside of us, that one needs to excavate to find out what that is. And that is usually done through looking into yourself, getting deep, excavating you, locating you. You are always your first client, and locating you and learn how to navigate from there. So you went into script writing.
I did, at least academically, yeah.
Yeah. When did you pick that discipline up, if you will? Because you said that you were reading. You read a lot. Where did that intersection of reading and writing through your expressing yourself through writing? When did it collide, or when did it come together, if you will?
I do remember it was 1994, 94. And to be honest, I just saw Pulp Fiction, and I watched, and
Great
something
movie.
about the
Love
movie.
it.
Yeah, something about the movie. And I had seen so many movies up to that point. I just grew up watching movies. My family was a big movie family. We always like rented a movie probably every Friday, whatever it was. We'd go to the movie theaters. My parents, as you can imagine, my father, as I described him, they weren't exactly the type of parents to censor. So I just think like all the movies I saw, Steven Seagal was my favorite actor growing up, because as an 8 or 9-year-old kid, I'm just seeing his movies and I'm like, wow, I don't know if I would show an 8 or 9-year-old kid like a Steven Seagal movie, just like breaking people's arms. But anyway, so I saw a lot of movies, and so I read as well. And so I think when I saw Pulp Fiction, that's when I'm like, oh, you can write like that. You can write like that for a movie where it just elevates, where it's elevated over what you like over a Steven Seagal movie, you know. And I think that's where I was like, you know what? I don't want to be a doctor anymore. I want to like write screenplays, you know, and I want to write movies. And of course, I thought I was gonna be the greatest screenwriter ever, you know. And then I ended up studying it at UCLA. I wasn't. Apparently, I didn't put in as much work to get a job, but yeah, I did. That's what academically that is what I studied, and I wrote screenplays for quite a while, trying to get them sold.
And as a writer of screenplays and seeing your work, as you said, you were trying to get it sold. What did it do to you as an individual? How did you interact with yourself, Eric? Were you excited that this is it, or you were just doing it to make it happen? Or were you, as they say, doing the hustle, or just, you know, what was your state like while you were writing and doing all those things?
You know, I was not the great, and I still am not the greatest hustler. And I think maybe if I was a better hustler, then I would probably have sold the script at that point. You know, I was in my early 20s when you graduate, you know, and I was working at a golf course. I was a starter at a golf course. I had my computer open all the time, and I was just like typing scripts with my feet up, you know, and, you know, sending them out to people that I knew. I was probably at that point just trying to understand the craft of it. Because even when you go to school, like, I think it's really when you do it and you get that experience of trying it and then having people reading it and having those people tell you it's total garbage, and they're like, oh, okay, why is this garbage? Okay, let me figure this out. It was a lot of that. And the funny thing is, sitting at that golf course and working, I worked there for 3 years as a starter at a golf course after graduating college. I think a lot of people would say, maybe you should get a job that pays a little bit more than minimum wage after graduating from UCLA. But I was just like, this is fun. And I realized it was fun because I would see people every day. Every day people would come in and they'd be super excited, right? Because they're going to play golf. It's not like, you know, we're not at a dental office. People aren't going to get their teeth drilled. Like, they're coming to have fun. So everyone had a really positive attitude. And I would play golf every day, every morning before my shift started. I would play with the same group of guys. They were probably, the average age of the guys I was playing with was probably 70 years old, 75 years old, because it was like this golf course that was frequented by senior citizens. And that was fantastic because I felt like I really got to learn a lot about life from them, because they were really honest and they were really nice and kind. And they would just tell me regrets in their own life as we're playing, you know, and tell me things about how, oh, well, you know, when I was younger, I did this, and man, that was dumb. Or they might say, oh, that was really fun. It was almost like I always mention this. It was like I got to see my life before my life happened, because I saw how they responded, how their experiences, and they were very open about where they felt, you know, they made mistakes. It wasn't like, oh, I'm older than you, so let me just tell you that everything I did was great, and let me just fill you with this information. It was more like, it was more friendly, like, and I think in that moment I realized, oh, you know, interacting with people and understanding people is probably what I want to do. So
Let me ask you a question too, Eric. Here you are in this with this for 3 years. You're in this reservoir of wisdom and experience with these guys. What stood out to you? What conversation amongst those guys within? I'm sure there's several, but which ones jumped from their mouth and from you listening and just landed in you, boom, like like a bomb, as they say, that affected your life and decision making?
I think it was probably when one of the men told me that, and he once again, he told, as a disclaimer, he told me in a very polite and not extreme way, but also in a serious way, if that makes sense. He basically said he kind of regretted having kids, and if he had to do it over again, he probably would not have had them and lived a different life. And because I think that's one of the things that we are told we should do, and like that we should live this life of, go to college, or go to school, get a job, take care of yourself, get married, have kids. It's a very linear approach. And I think he was someone who just said, I did that approach, and, it's hard because he didn't want to say, I hate my life, because he was super happy and he liked his grandchildren. But, he was definitely like, I think I would have done something different if I had to do it over again. And I was like, okay, like I need to, not to say that I was like, no, now I'm not going to have kids anymore or get married, but it definitely helped me reevaluate the things that I was doing, because I knew it was coming from someone who had experienced it. Because, at that age, everyone's always thinking, oh, of course, this is what you do. This is exactly what you do, because this is what people tell me I should do. And I watch commercials. I watch these Lexus commercials where they have this very beautiful, luxurious house and a family of kids driving, and it's Christmas, and it looks like very Home Alone-ish. And I think that helped me realize, no, that's not real life. Like, real life are the stories that these guys were telling me. And a lot of them had different stories where they like grew up and they're like, oh, my kids are great. This is fantastic. Yada, yada, yada. And I was like, okay, that's really cool, because it shows that we have different ways to experience life and different values. And it's not one or the other.
And here you are with these guys again for 3 years. You're going to get to see the richness of personalities, if you will, at the tail end, not when they were first forming. And as you said, they were telling you all of these different stories, sharing their wisdom with you. And being there, as far as a sponge, I assume that you were there. When they were engaged, Eric, into their conversation, were you more of an observer? Were you listening, or you was just back and forth? What was that exchange going on there? And did you probe them? Did you ask them some questions to delve into, okay, why are you saying that? Or you were just, as I said, as a spectator, just listening to the conversation?
Well, my personality type is one where I engage with people by not listening, or I would say not listening, but I'm definitely not a quiet observer type or who listens. But I'm always listening. Even as I'm talking, I tell people I am listening, even though I'm the one who's talking. Because I tend to observe how people react to what I'm saying. And in this case, it was definitely, I think I knew exactly how they viewed me, and they liked playing with golf with me every morning, because I think they saw me as their grandkid, because I was about the age of their grandkids. So it was like hanging out with their grandkids every day, where I think one guy called me, oh, the prodigal son, like, I think they just liked my energy, like my youthful energy. And so I probably was asking a lot of questions in a fun way, nothing probing exactly, but essentially probing. I'll probably joke around. I might talk a lot about my life, and then they would find that funny. And then, of course, we'd go back and forth. They're like, oh, well, when I did that, they would say, like, this is what happened to me. So it was really just friends. Like, I just befriended them. We were friends. And I think it just shows that, you don't have to always interact with people in your same age group. It's great to, like, it's funny. I work with, I don't want to say children, because they don't. I work with young people now, and it's fun to, like, interact with all different types of ages, because we're all on the same path. We're just maybe at different spots on that path, and we can all find ways to help each other. Like, the person who's just starting it can remind the person who's all the way at the end, maybe, like, what they were doing it for. Because I often find that when we're younger, we often are maybe a little bit even more true with ourselves. We might not know it and we might not be confident about it, but we might be a little bit closer to truly knowing what we love. And then I think, like you said, as we go through life and go through these stages of life, that gets kind of taken away from us and we have to refine that again. I think Nietzsche has a great quote that I always use where he says, true maturity consists in regaining the seriousness one had as a child at play. And I think that's like a great quote, because I think oftentimes we associate maturity with being an adult, but really maturity is like reconnecting with yourself and what you truly are. Yeah. And that probably is what you were when you were younger.
Yeah. I believe that when we're younger, Eric, we have a glimpse of who we are. Because we are not saturated with the programmings of all. And we tap into it through playing and that form, because even playing and puts us in our mind in the theta state where we are able to be relaxed and enjoy and gather data. I believe that we have glimpses as children because, again, all that information is not there to make us doubt. Kid didn't know that they can't fly.
Right.
You know, until they get some additional information in there. It says, well, you know, there's this thing called gravity. But that child, you would have to explain. And so I believe that they get glimpses of it. So here you are, you've been there for 3 years with these guys hanging out, learning a lot about life lessons and possibilities and regrets and all of those different things. And you got a chance to see all these different personalities, if you will, at the latter end of the spectrum when it comes to aging, if you will. When you were moving forward in your life, Eric, you've been there 3 years. Where did you go and how did that movement take place? How did it mature for you to make that exit?
Oh, it was an easy one. It was an easy exit because I got fired. So that was an easy one. It's funny. We got new ownership. We went under new ownership, and I guess my style of doing what I want didn't really sit well with the new owners, which is totally fine. That's their prerogative. Yeah. And so I got terminated, and then I was like, well, I guess I got to look for something else. And the funny thing was, at the time when I was a starter on the golf course, a lot of people would come in and tell me they liked my voice. Because, as a starter in golf course, you get on the mic and when I speak slowly, my voice tends to get lower because I'm trying to enunciate and say the names clearly. So I'd be like, the John threesome is next up on the tee, following them. And people are like, wow, you got a great voice. Yeah. I'm like, oh, they're like, you should do radio. So at the time I was like, okay. And so I applied for, a few radio jobs, and I got one in a very dilapidated old studio in East Hollywood, where I was co-hosting my own radio show, as well as, because I guess that's a little bit of a hustle. That was like a side hustle. And then I also got a job tutoring kids, because I knew that was something that I had a lot of experience in, like in my volunteer work. So I started working with kids and teaching them, and then doing the radio thing. And it was fun because I had the creative aspect. And I also got to learn a lot about speaking and using that voice and talking to people. And it's very similar to the golf course. And then with the kids, I would work with them. And that's really how I kind of started crafting my teaching style. And it's the same style I use to this day. So it's like 20 years ago, I developed this kind of, I wouldn't say developed, I wasn't conscious of it, but I realized, I guess this is going to be my style going forward. I'm going to be the fun person. I tend to be pretty jokey when I work with my students. I like to have fun, and I don't necessarily stick to the rules. And I think that's part of my process and method, I guess.
I think kids love that. So here you are. You're at the other end of the spectrum, looking at personalities. You were with the old boys for 3 years, and now you're at the other end, the young kids now. And here you are again, getting some glimpse into the personalities of humans because we all have these different things and quirks and so forth. As you were there with the kids, what did you start to learn there? We talked about what you learned with the elder group. What were you learning with the younger kids?
I think I was learning that, you know, the thing that really defines us, because you can definitely see it with kids. It's a little harder with adults because, you know, obviously as adults, we hide this.
Yeah.
The thing that really defines us is what we value. Like, what are the things that we truly, truly want and will choose over other things? I found most kids, and by most, I wouldn't even say most, I would say the majority, about half the kids, really valued that feeling of safety and knowing that they were doing the right thing. That was why the reason why they followed the rules wasn't they're just doing what they were told. It was more they valued order and a sense of because order gives us a feeling of safety and security. And that's when I started realizing, oh, and that's kind of like most of society. You know, why do they push marriage, kids, house, school, job, family? Because it does create a safer society, I think, and a society with more stability. But what I realized was, once again, that's only half. That was half the kids. That's 50% of the population does not value that as much as the majority. And I think I started realizing, oh, that's the clash. And when you go to school, most teachers are that type, right? They're the type that, oh, let me give you, you want teachers, especially young, like when kids are young, you want teachers to make kids feel safe and that school is a safe space and that we're here and we're all working together to be better people and learn. But I realized also is that there are a lot of kids who don't do that. There's, you know, a third of the classroom is going to run around the class and grab things and throw things. And that's how they learn. You know, they learn by doing. Yeah. So working with kids helped me start figuring out, oh, there are these kinds of people and then there are these kinds of people. And I started kind of seeing like the percentages, for lack of a better word. Like, no, I didn't do any studies at this time. I mean, it was more just me like remembering after doing it over and over again. Like, oh yeah, like a minority people are gonna be like this, and then a majority of the kids are gonna be like this. And it also taught me, how am I gonna work with that kid? Like most of the time, that majority, they don't need to necessarily find themselves in the sense because society is telling them that who they are is great. So they've actually worked in a sense on being themselves quite a bit. When you're told the way you are is the way you should be, you have a kind of an advantage. So my job with them was to teach them about all the other people and that the way they value things is not necessarily how everyone else values them. And that there's different ways to think. So for the other kids, I would obviously try to teach them the opposite. Like, okay, well, even though you're being told to be this way, let's tap into what you are. So it taught me that I had to deal in a very short way. It taught me how to deal with kids differently.
Yeah. And as you are collecting your data from your relationships with the kids, and you had mentioned where your style, because usually that's where we will get to see as we are serving, we start seeing certain patterns, if you will. And those patterns kind of start fitting in with us. It feels comfortable, as you said, safety and stuff like that. It feels, this is part of me that I want to deposit this way of thinking, this way of perception, so that I can develop my style. When you started noticing that, Eric, how did you begin to connect the processes together? How did you make it a series by which now you're going to be able to become effective more at what you do?
You know, at this point, I did a lot of studying. I mean, I always did a lot of reading up on personality types and like other people's methodologies and theories. Like I think MBTI is the one that's really popular now, the Enneagram. And I started reading up on that stuff when I was 17 or 18. And I kept reading on all these different theories. And I think that was helpful in that it gave me kind of a system to start with. Yeah. And I'm not a big system guy. So it's a weird thing where I'm like, I like systems to give us a bit of guidance. But then we have to use our own intuition at a certain point. And so I think that's when I started really combining like the theory of personality and then developing my own, and then using that to finally start my own education company. So I actually started my own education company when I was 27, because at that point I didn't know any better. I'm like, yeah, let's do this. Let's I don't know, let's take a chance and try that and start it. And it became pretty successful using this method, and that was part of the mission statement, was basically making students be the best version of themselves and growing, showing that improvement versus like, just filling them with information. I'm not a big fan of just filling people with information. I used to tell my teachers, and by teachers, I mean the teachers that I would hire for my education company. I would tell them, if you teach your student everything you know, then that means you're limiting them. Because obviously, I tell my students now, you guys are going to be, way more than I will when you're my age, because I mean, the internet technology is always getting better. I'm always telling you, we didn't have like the internet to go to when I was in high school. You just click, oh, what's the capital of Senegal? I don't know. Let me just Google it. Right. Or ask Siri. So I try to teach my teachers that, what they're really, because we're not there to just like give them information. We're there to help them find themselves, because you help someone find themselves, then they can use who they really are to get the information that they need most.
And your project that you put together was the Utopia project. Talk to us a little about that. Let me back up a little. Once you created the school, Eric, and you had that put together, what was happening with Eric? Where was Eric in that space right there? What type of conversation were you having with yourself? How did you feel in that space? Because I'm sure there's some joy, but then the business of the school and all the other things, and you as an individual are in the middle of all of that, dealing with it, managing it. How did you manage all of that?
Well, I didn't manage it because I'm terrible at probably managing things. I had a great director, and she was fantastic. I knew her before she was my director. She was a friend as well. And I think our personality types were great working together, because I think I'm a very good mouthpiece, and I'm good at communicating and expressing a vision and a mission and helping, empowering. At this point, I had students, but I was also trying to empower our teachers as well. And I was great at saying, this is what we're going for, guys. Let me teach you how to do it, and let's just do it and push it forward. When it came to actually managing the day-to-day operations of things and the logistics, and my director was great at that. And so we worked together, but to be honest, I just deferred to her. I was just like, okay, if you think that's the right thing to do, let's do it that way, because you're better at that. And in that space, I learned a lot, because as I was interacting with teachers, like adults, and with students, I learned, there's not that much difference between the adult who just graduated from teaching credential program, or the retired teacher who's now working as a tutor. There's not much difference between those two and then the kids I was working with, because we're all still on that path to learn more about ourselves, and I would teach them this personality typing methodology. And I found that a lot of the teachers really didn't know themselves that well. And that's no slight, that's no slight. It's just, we're not taught to do that in school. And it was kind of eye-opening for them, but in a good way, because they could start saying, oh, like my student might not be my personality type. They might not value the same things that I do, and I need to be okay with that. I can't convince them to value something that they shouldn't value. I need to go with their values and try to figure out a way to push them in the right path versus push them towards my path. So that was kind of that space I was in.
It was a great sin of the educational system to not do that, not to educate the kids about their personality and all of they're so focused on the academic part that the practicalness of behavior and personality type and understanding. I remember my kids, they would be in a house and you have these different personalities. My 4 sons, they would be battling, if you will. And I would sit them down and say, guys, our family is a microcosm of the world out there. If you don't know how to speak and deal with each other, you will have a difficult time out there. And so my suggestion to you guys, and this is how I talk to you, is that you learn to understand each other, because when you step out of the house, this is exactly what you have to do with your friends, teachers, people. You have to learn to understand them. And then I would back out, and I would see them, um, fighting, and I would tell them that's the lowest form of communication. And I would tell them you have to find another way. I never told them, Eric, what to do. I just told them you need to find another way to communicate everything, all your feelings, your pain, all that. I swear, Eric, one day I came around this corner of the house, and they had a discussion going on about the game that they had and how they were going to work out the details as to how they're going to take turns and stuff like that. I backed out of that just to watch it and see that these little boys were in the midst of a negotiation of how to handle their behavior. It was one of the most rewarding things I've ever seen as a dad from that experience. But yeah, it is an opportunity to work with kids, and they teach you so much. So here you are, you got your school going and the project. Since you're a writer, number one, which came first? Was it the book or the project? Which one? Which one came first? Which one did you give birth to first?
Definitely the website, the Utopia Project.
Yeah.
Mainly because we wanted just a place where we could distill the information. And by we, I mean I had partners working on the back end of that website. They did, they're my friends as well, so they did a great job. And I don't know anything about web creation, so I'm like, okay, sure. Like, let me give you. I will do my part in writing these things. And we created this test, yeah. And it was funny, and I did that, and it was great. And at this point, I was still writing scripts and trying to get them sold. And there's a story behind this. I joined this writers group to, to meet people, but also really just as a way of getting myself in that headspace of I need to write, I need to create, I need to be around people who are writing. And we go to the bar after we do these writing sessions, and we, you get to talking. And of course, I mentioned the personality typing methodology that I have. Like, oh, these are, I use animals, and animals are really fun. Like when you tell someone they're a fox, they're just like, oh, I get that. This person is a fox personality type. I know exactly how that person acts. That's like James Bond, Han Solo, suave, roguish type. So we get to talking about that at the bar. And a friend of mine, she was like, you should really write a book on this. And I was like, oh, no, I'm writing pilots, about rabbits that are sex addicts. That's what I'm going to do. And then she finally put it in her show that she was working on a show at the time. And she put the personality type ideology or methodology in her show or episode. Like there's a scene where it's a bottle episode. So they're in just one space and they're getting a test for their job. And it's all like an animal test, like someone becomes an otter and stuff. So she used that for jokes, and like it works within the story. I was like, gosh, if she's going to use it in her TV show, then I really should, I should write a book on this. So that's the way I pitched it. It was, and that's when that was in a weird way was the impetus for me writing the book was not my own ambition or not my own sense of motivation, but someone else doing it. I'm like, okay, that's a great idea. Very typical of my personality type to just like wait on things. But yeah, so that's when I wrote the book, and and that was maybe I wrote it a few years ago, but it was just published. It takes a while publishing, apparently. I think I finished it 2 years ago, and it was just released in April of this year.
Oh, congrats on that.
Thank you so much.
So invite us into those pages, because one of the things that I try to make the listener aware of is that books house wisdom, knowledge, insights that has the capability of rescuing you from whatever situation that you're in if you allow the words to be deposited in you. Walk us through the process, and I want to go back later on about the school. What makes the school? This is part two, if you will. What are the kids learning as far as uh, understanding themselves to help them move through their life? You can answer either one, however you want to answer that. And as far as the book, what was some of those key points that are there that we want to get the listener a little excited about? As back in my day, we used to call it cliffhangers, man. I'm sure you watch a lot of TV and you knew about all the cliffhanger stuff. So both questions are however you want to answer them, in what format. Go ahead.
So the book basically is a guidebook to understand. So the book is called The Power of Personality, and it's a guidebook to understanding the people in your life better. And it should teach you, I know there's a lot of these types of personality kind of methodologies, and the book always features some kind of test, and you take a test, and then the whole book is a list of prescriptions based on how you scored on the test. The Power of Personality is more of a book that teaches you, the reader, to be the test. It will teach you the methodology. And I use a lot of stories and a lot of jokes. I try to write it in a way where people can go, oh, that's kind of funny. And also I'm getting information from it. And I use a lot of stories from my own life in terms of working with my students, or just personal stories, so that people can really connect with the idea through their own experience. Because I think that's important to me. Like, an idea in and of itself is great. It's a theory, but we understand the theory of gravity a lot better because we've fallen on the ground and gotten hurt.
Yeah.
We just said, oh, I get it. Like, things fall, things get, like that. That's kind of how we understand abstract concepts the best, I think. Yeah. So that's how I wrote the book. So if people were to buy the book and read it, I think a lot of the ways that they'll get the information is from me using practical examples from real life. And ideally, the goal is for people to just understand the people in their lives better, but including themselves. I think strangely enough, the most important thing is to understand ourselves better, but I think we understand ourselves better by understanding other people first. So that way we can start comparing. I think it's really hard to understand ourselves without using other people around us to compare, because then otherwise we get too insular and we're like, oh no, this is how I am, and this is kind of how everyone is, like, should be like me. And so I guess in a weird way, I think we learn about ourselves best by starting with other people first,
And how does that approach relates to the kids now, because they're younger, and you're going to assist them in finding out, locating themselves, if you will? How do you approach the younger ones with that information?
In much the same way. Like, now I don't necessarily have them. I will, once I teach them the personality typing methodology, I do often have them personality type and figure out what personality type their parents are or their siblings are, like there are other people around them first, generally. But what we first start doing is we start analyzing literature, or actually I use a lot of like YouTube clips of like TV shows and film, because kids don't think that they're doing schoolwork when they do that. When they see like when they see a scene from Game of Thrones, they're not thinking this is school. And I don't want them to think this is school, because I don't think it's school, right? But they just are like, okay, let me watch this. This is fun. And as I have them really dig down deep into the scene, I have them understand those characters and why are those characters doing the things they are, and what personality is that character and what personality is that character, because you can see, because they're different, they're clashing for this reason. Yeah. I think they do it. It's a little bit easier for them to do it with characters as opposed to real people at first. And I tell them that's kind of why we learn about characters in school. We learn about literature and we read literature and try to understand the characters. I always tell my students, when you die, someone's not going to be there right before you die to test you on all the books that you read and what was the name of this character and what was we're not trying to memorize characters so that we can thus tell someone, oh, Puck in Midsummer Night's Dream was like this. It's not about that. We're understanding characters because characters are like real people come to life in books. Yeah. And you're gonna interact with these real people when you get out into the real world. So understanding the characters is kind of like not necessarily a security blanket, training wheels to understanding real people. So,
hey guys, we are going to provide all of Eric's links and all those things that will get you access to him, because as you know, you all my listeners that are following me, you guys know how I feel about books and stuff like that. I keep telling them it is one of the cheapest way to get a master class with someone one-on-one, and it's just a few bucks. You don't have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yeah. You just go and grab the book, find a nice, comfortable spot, and that author is communicating with you, and you're having that one-on-one. So we're going to provide all that information for you guys to get the power of personality, and so you can get an understanding of who you are, your friends and family around you, so you will be able to enhance your relationship with that knowledge. And those of you guys that want to find out a little more about the kids also, we'll provide all of that, again, so you guys can have access to Eric and make sure that you guys communicate with him and make those changes necessary to get you your freedom. Eric, thank you, man, for coming to Threads of Enlightenment. This has been a good one.
Oh, it's been so fun talking to you, Ken.
Oh, thanks, man.
Thanks for tuning in to Threads of Enlightenment with Ken Primus. Hopefully you're now feeling more empowered to overcome the challenges in your life, whatever they may be. Share that inspiration with others by telling them about this podcast, rating it, and of course, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. For more connection, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Threads of Enlightenment. Until next time, stay enlightened.